Let's talk about affairs and relationships. And, we want to say that we have actually developed a therapy that helps couples who want to stay together after an affair to rebuild marriage number two. And it's effective. It really does work. And we have empirical data that demonstrates that very powerfully. However, if you actually knew the steps that a couple has to go through to get over an affair, you would not have the affair in the first place because it's a lot of work to rebuild marriage number two.
Let me clarify something. What we mean by marriage number two is that, when somebody has had an affair, marriage number one, that is, this current marriage, has burned to the ground. You know that. It feels unbelievably painful and horrible. But what we are talking about is a way of rebuilding a whole different kind of marriage that recreates trust in a different way. We call that marriage number two, but it's with the same person.
And our interventions for helping couples get over an affair really involve three steps. The first step we call atonement. The second step we call attunement. And the third step we call attachment. So what are these three phases for getting over an affair and rebuilding marriage number two?
Yeah, let me jump in for a moment because a lot of times when couples go into therapy, when there's been an affair, here's what might happen. Either the therapist hears that there's been an affair and then ignores it all the way through. Doesn't talk about the affair, just talks about what's going on with you here and now. That is a miserable failure. Another way that therapy can make mistakes is they'll immediately start talking about what's wrong in the marriage on both sides. For each person, what have you done wrong? And that really doesn't work. That's terrible because the person who's been betrayed doesn't want to talk about what they've done wrong. It makes it seem like they are the cause for the affair. And that is wrong, wrong, wrong. It doesn't work that way. So let's talk about that first phase and then
Atonement.
Yeah,
Right.
atonement. So here's what atonement looks like in therapy. And by the way, it's almost impossible to really recover from an affair without therapy because there's so much intense emotion involved. But here's what atonement looks like in therapy. The person who's been hurt, it's called the hurt partner, needs to be able to ask the person who's had the affair any question they want about the affair. Anything they want. So they can ask things like, what hotel did you take her to? Where did you have dinner with him? Did you buy this gift for her? Etc. Those kinds of questions. And the other person, the person who had the affair, needs to be absolutely transparent and give full answers. Otherwise, it's going to fail if that person is still hiding. Now, let me mention something else that several people have really talked about in the research, and that is this. And it's really important to know this. The person who's been hurt often suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder that's caused by the affair. We call that PTSD, the initials for it. And what that means is that the hurt person is having these intrusive thoughts into their mind about the affair, maybe pictures, imagining, or maybe even having seen their partner with the other affair partner, that they cannot control. They just come in, and when they come in to the hurt partner's mind, it brings up all the emotions again of finding out about the affair, the pain, the anguish, the rage, the fear, all those feelings come up. And so They also may have trouble sleeping, or they may get very depressed. Sometimes at home, they'll go through big mood swings where they'll be okay one day and then the next day they'll just be a mess, right? That's PTSD. That's what it looks like. Or sometimes somebody can really numb themselves. They may drink more or use weed more, something to suppress the emotions of it. So there's a lot of signs of PTSD that we see in her partners that are really important for the other partner who had the affair to understand. You see, the reality is that the person who has PTSD can't help that. They can't control that. It's like having the flu and having a terrible fever. You can't control that and make it go away just because you want it to. That doesn't work. PTSD is the same thing. So, important to understand that for both people in the first place. Now, back to atonement. First of all, asking questions. The hurt partner is asking questions of that partner who had the affair to find out whatever they want to find out. Now, let me caution the hurt partner to try not to ask any questions directly about the sexual activity your partner has had with the other person. The reason is that asking those sex-related questions will create more images, imaginary images, in your mind with that PTSD, so that now you have even more PTSD with those pictures, having heard the affair person describe what the sex was like, you see. You don't want to make your PTSD worse, but everything else is on the table that you can ask about.
Yeah, and one thing that we do as therapists is make sure that those questions and the feelings expressed by the hurt partner don't involve criticism and contempt and the four horsemen, defensiveness and stonewalling. So we make sure that the person is really talking about what they feel and what they might have needed, and they're using gentle startup. The partner that's had the affair really needs to express genuine remorse. So without remorse, none of this therapy is going to work. It has to be real remorse, and it has to go beyond remorse. Atonement really means not just saying you're sorry. It's really an examination of what led you to betray your own values and have the affair, and a vow and a commitment to really change your behavior. That's the only way atonement really works.
Mm-hmm. That's really true. I mean, I have had people in my office where the person who had the affair will weep as they're expressing their remorse. I even had one who was very powerful who'd had an affair for, 3-4 years, something like that, that was excruciating to the other person. And he literally went down on his knees to beg her for forgiveness. Now, you may not be up for that, but it certainly is an expression of deep sincerity, deep remorse, and really, really wanting things to be different. Let me also say that the person who has had the affair needs to be able to really empathize, if you can, with the hurt partner. So if that hurt partner is expressing their feelings about it, they're going to be saying things like, "Oh my God, my whole world is upside down. My whole world is destroyed. I feel fragmented like shattered glass into 1,000 pieces." And then the partner who had the affair needs to be able to say, "I get it. I get it. I can understand why you'd feel that way." that has to be real too.
An affair also, by definition, involves deception. And that is a very important thing to take a look at within the transparency that's required in the atonement phase of the therapy.
Mm-hmm. Right. So a lot of times the questions that the hurt partner is asking are about their suspicions that they may have had all along. Like, where did you go that weekend? Because I know you weren't working. Things like that.
Right.
And that's where that person who had the affair needs to really be transparent and say exactly where they were.
Right. The second phase is attunement. Now, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that in all affairs, there's an avoidance of conflict and an avoidance of self-disclosure. So people didn't give voice to their complaints about their partner and instead complained about their partner to somebody else. And that kind of betrayal really is an avoidance of dealing with conflict, and that has to change. So there has to be a commitment to really raise concerns with the partner in a new way. And so conflict really has to be dealt with, and conflict avoidance is the enemy of that. So in attunement, we talk about avoiding conflict avoidance and really talking about what you feel and what you need in the relationship. And here in this phase, we can actually talk about what went wrong with the relationship that may have contributed to the affair. Because the conflict avoidance is one symptom of an affair and part of the deception, really not raising your concerns with your partner.
Right. And let me also mention that that transition between the atonement phase and then the attunement phase really needs to be under control of the hurt partner. The hurt partner is the one who can say, okay, I've heard enough. I've asked my questions. Okay, all right. I'm ready to look at the relationship. And, the reality is that, God, that atonement phase can last a really long time. I had one couple, for example, where the woman who was betrayed, married to her husband, who'd had, prostitutes all over the place, she came in with 10 yellow notepads of questions.
Yeah.
That took us a while, and she wanted to ask all of those questions. So it took like 6 months to get through that atonement phase before she was finally ready to move on into looking at the relationship itself, the marriage, and what alternative ways she and her partner, or you and your partner, need to express your needs, different ways of expressing your complaints, different ways of listening to one another, and replacements for criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, that is really shutting down, when you're discussing a complaint. It's crucial to have those alternatives. And so in that second phase, that's exactly what the therapist needs to be doing, is have you bring up your issues and then give you very different ways of talking about them.
And attunement really rebuilds trust. And that's kind of our goal on that second phase. The third phase is attachment, which is rebuilding commitment to the relationship. And quite often, maybe starting a sexual relationship again with this renewed commitment and understanding.
Yeah. Right. So there has to be real commitment. And during that phase, what's also discussed is what's going to be the penalty if there's more betrayal. That too needs to be put on the table so that you both know what the cost would be if there was yet another affair or betrayal. But ultimately, there's a really deeper commitment to this new kind of relationship. And a lot of times that attunement phase takes a long time too. So, this isn't a quick process. It's a fast, doing it too fast really fails. It doesn't work. For example, sometimes the person who had the affair says, okay, I've said I'm sorry. Now let's put it behind us. That's so common. I hear that all the time at my office. Nope, not going to work. That hurt partner needs to really go deep into their own pain and their anger, their anguish, and express that to the other person and have the other person hear it.
Right.
And that may be a process that needs to get repeated a whole bunch. Don't forget, there's PTSD in that hurt partner.
Right.
So, you may have done a beautiful job as the person who had the affair of expressing remorse, and yet the hurt partner has nightmares that following night about the affair. And those nightmares are horrible. So they need to hear the remorse again. Right?
Yeah, and part of what we do in the attunement phase is to really go over regrettable incidents and maybe small betrayals and that have happened, and really dissect them and understand the enduring vulnerabilities that each person brings to every situation where there was some kind of disappointment or letdown or betrayal. And and we have a systematic way of processing these past regrettable incidents. So there's deeper understanding of one another, internal worlds of trust and betrayal and commitment, what that means for each person.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I also want to say that I know many of you who have experienced betrayals don't believe us. Why should you? You feel anguish, you feel hurt, you feel pain, you feel rage, and it feels absolutely impossible to ever even look that person in the face, let alone begin to trust them, right?
Right.
I know a lot of you feel that way, and that really makes sense when you haven't gone through a process like this. But let me tell you something. I've been doing clinical work with couples with affairs for years and years and years, 20 years, 25 years. And, for example, I had a couple where the guy had 57 affairs over the course of about 10 years. And 3 of those partners he fell in love with. And he had a wife at home with 3 little children. So you can imagine, oh my God, the rage, with which she entered my office. And yet, they made it work. They had to work really, really hard. It took about a year's worth of therapy for them to really get beyond this. But they rebuilt their marriage into this beautiful, supportive marriage with no betrayals. And every now and then, I get a card from them saying, we're still doing well. And we saw them like 15 years ago.
Right.
So it's possible. I know it is.
Right.
Then we have the research we've just done. Science tells us, our clinical experience tells us that despite how horrible you may feel, there is